Hi everyone, it's Michelle Renee Hiatt from Sew on the Go. This is Tutorial Tuesday, week 16. This week I have a special interruption to our binding series because I want to take you behind the scenes. I'm releasing a special project next week. There's more to come as it gets closer. Make sure you're subscribing to my newsletter and following me on Facebook. But for this project, I have to pull from Stash. Therefore, I thought it would be fun to give you a sneak peek at the process I go through when I need to pull from Stash. So it's definitely a process. You need to think about it. I have a few tips that I'm going to share with you. So let's talk about where to begin. Overall, you have to keep your fabric organized. I laugh when I say that if you just saw the steps I went through, but you want to be aware of the fabric that you have. You definitely need to give yourself enough lead time. It's going to take you at least 2 to 3 times longer to pull from stash than to go shopping, and that is if you are organized. You have to be ready to make a concession, be willing. You have to accept that you're either going to need to go shopping for a missing piece or that the quilt may not be exactly as you envisioned. Next, you really are going to want to make a test block, especially if you're making a tiny bit of a concession or you have any concerns. And I always like to have a backup plan, meaning I have some alternate fabrics already pulled so I don't have to go back out and hunt. All right. So I traditionally, in advance of pulling my fabrics, I typically have a design in mind. You will probably have a pattern. I also typically have a color plan in mind. And for this special project, there's actually a specific color plan that I have to follow. See that? I have to follow. Then I'm ready to go play. So I usually start by pulling 3 potential border fabrics or inspiration fabrics that I think might work. From there, I go about pulling everything that I think might work with those borders, and it does make a mess. I cannot show you my cutting table right now. And then I go to my design wall. So let me take you there. So I start by putting all of these up on my design wall. Let me back up a second so you can kind of see. I've gone ahead and lined up my design wall just to give me room to back up and take a look at it. So the challenge that I have actually has me using some colors that are pretty specific, and I need basically for what I've selected to do for that challenge to have a dark, a medium, a light medium, a light, and then background fabric. Okay, so that's what I'm looking for. Of course, I need to have a certain amount of yardage for each of those, so that comes into play as well. So I thought I had a border fabric that kind of was fallish, and I couldn't find it, so I stopped at the Yankee Quilter over the weekend, and I picked out this particular fabric because it has the plum, if you would. I need a red violet, I need a green and an orange, a yellowish gold, and those are the colors that I'm working with. It is pretty much a split complementary color plan. So I chose this because I felt it had the colors in it that I needed, and I couldn't locate the border fabric that I was thinking about, and I thought it was a good replacement. So I wanted to, from there though, definitely go with some stash. So this is my end result. This is where I ended up with that. I was happy with this selection, but I started actually with a few, let's say more than a few options that I auditioned. So let me take you through that. So where I started with is I thought about my red violet being a dark. So I wanted this for my dark. Now if I had this as my dark, I then needed a medium and a light medium. So I went with the orange, was one of my very first pulls, and I'm happy to say it survived, although it was questioned a couple times. And so they looked great. Then I needed a green, right, for my light medium.
So I originally pulled this, and I really liked it because it was the orange in the fabric here. And it sort of pulled the bluish green out that's in this fabric. However, it definitely was not a light medium. So then, sticking with this still as my light medium, I then started thinking about what if I went with my red violet as a light fabric. So I pulled out my color tab and I looked at the tab and I found that this color went into my stash and found it. So then I was pretty happy with that. Let's put this down here. But I still was not really thrilled with this green. It sort of didn't look great with the orange fabric. And it's the color's in there, but it's not as noticeable as more of the Kelly green. So then I went about auditioning a few things. So I ended up auditioning this piece, which I liked. I liked that it had the blue in it, and I had enough of it. And I then went to this fabric, and I really liked that, although the circles, even though I love the texture, I think the circles just jumped out a little too much. So therefore, I ended up going with this green. Now, I thought that maybe the orange would look best as the dark, and then the green as the medium, the red violet as the light medium, except for I was short some yardage, and this is a very old fabric. We won't tell you the year, but it says printed by Rowan. If anyone follows Cape, you know how long ago that was. So I found this fabric that I had a little bit more of, but I really did not like it as much. So in sticking with this combination, this was what I was planning on using. I forgot, I also thought about utilizing this Aborigine dot, which I really, really like. It just looked a little muddy against this blue, this red violet, I should say. So I wasn't as sure about that. So this is where I did land for this particular one, and I still wasn't in love with it, so I kept searching. Which brings us to this collection. Now, in searching for that fabric I knew I had, I came across this, and I loved the red violet in it. And I liked that I could use it as the dark. Fabulous. I had it stashed with this particular fabric, which is a perfect match. Love that idea. And then there was an orange, pinkish orange in the pile that I had this in. It was in a nice little package in a project and weight. But I thought it was a little too loud for the orange that I was looking for. So I found this dot, and I like that a lot. Now I need a light medium, and so I had this particular green dot that I thought would work, and I'm 95% there. My only concern is having the two dots, but there's only a few units in the block that they would touch, so my thought is I would need to make a sample block to see how I felt about it. So that's where I landed with this one. My second hesitation, by the way, with this one is it doesn't read fall to me, and that's the other part of the challenge. And I think I failed to mention that earlier, so I wanted something fall. I have to have it done by a certain date. I really want to pull it from stash, and it has to really utilize a plumish color, green, orange, and have some gold. All right? So I kept searching, and I did go through 2 or 3 others that I'm not going to bore you with, but I finally found that fabric I was looking for. All right, so This is the fabric that I have been looking for. And believe it or not, I actually found it when I was looking for another piece of fabric. I had given up on it. I thought maybe it was somebody else's fabric I had seen, but I finally found it. And it was in a project box, slated to be a fall project, perfectly packaged. So I have a couple options here. This is my ideal, right? Love the border. It brings in, so the red violet is definitely more towards the red right in here. But I have some of it in my next fabric. But so this is my border. Love it. It's pulling together all the colors and the exact tones that I'm looking for. So love it. Stash. Ancient, ancient old. We, again, if we looked at the salvage, it says Rowan. So we're talking pre-2010, probably this fabric, or very close to it. All right. Next is this fabric, which I want to use the circles fabric for my dark. And I'm fairly certain it's going to work. I have just a little extra from what I need, so I'm going to have to definitely see. But I think the way the design goes, I think I will be good with it. But I have a backup, and we'll talk about that in a second. So next is my orange, my medium, and I'm going to use this dot. Love it. Love that I have a floral. I have some lines because the size of the piecing of this, it probably definitely will not look like circles. And then I have some dots. And then for my light medium, I actually have a floral. Now, this might be too large of a print. It's actually a medium print, size print, but it might be too large. But I think, again, I can get away with it. There's two reasons why. One, I have extra. So I could fussy cut it to get more of the greens that I'm hoping it represents. And the second reason being is, again, the design of the pattern, my design of it. It is, it could probably, the way it's going to be anchored, I could probably get away with it. All right, and then for my light medium, I'm back to my Aborigine dots that I wanted to use in a different version. And I really, really think it's going to work here because I have gold undertones here. So, but in order for me to determine if this is going to be a success, I am going to need to make a test block. So I'm going to do that. And so meanwhile, I've pulled some backups, right? Because this has a deadline, so I'm going to need to make sure that I have the fabric if things go wrong. And so therefore my plan is, one, if this doesn't work, right? So if the green is not reading properly, I have found this goldish green Aborigine dot that I think I can use in place of it, and I still am going to have that read as a gold or a green, right? That presents an issue possibly with my other Aborigine dots, but again, I'd have to see. So that's my thought if that green doesn't work. Now, if this doesn't work, my circle print doesn't work, my backup plan is to go with this dark, it's called paprika, actually. It's no longer in print, but it's an Aborigine paprika. And I think that will look fabulous, but that knocks out my orange dot. So then I have to determine, am I good with using 2 and possibly 3 Aborigine dots for the gold, or could I possibly use this instead, right? So I probably would have to not use the ones with the blue and the ones with the pink, but again, I have a good amount of this fabric, and for what I need, I could probably fussy cut some strips that I could utilize. So 1 or 2 of these would work. My hope is that if I went with this, that then I could definitely use the green and not pull up the Aborigine dots. um, that have the green and the gold. All right, but if I had to, I could probably get away with it. It would not be my first choice. So these are just some of the things that I go through, and when I'm looking for my fabric, it helps to have your fabric organized, which I thought I did. I organized my stash, as I've talked about on a couple other sessions, uh, like a quilt shop does almost. But my problem is that I had pulled some fabric for some projects, and then I never got to those projects. So some of the fabric that I thought I did have, but I just had them organized separately. So that reminds me to say, every once in a while, it's worthwhile going through projects you've put aside to determine, do you want to keep them as projects, and maybe make them fresh in your mind by looking at them, or is it time to put them away back with fabric of its similar type? All right. So pulling from stash is not the easiest. You have to be willing to make some concessions. You also want to give yourself enough time, because it's not as easy as going out and picking fresh fabric from a fabric shop, which is probably why so many of us go quickly to the online or into our local quilt shop to purchase, which is all good. It's just that if you want to challenge yourself for some stash busting, keeping your fabric organized, making sure you're kind of aware of what kind of fabric you have, giving yourself enough lead time to pull what you want, and then being able to make a concession, right? And then your fourth thing would be have a backup plan, because more than likely with pulling from stash, you're going to want to make a test block. All right. So that's my advice for pulling from stash.
So hopefully you found that helpful. Here's a shot of those overall tips once again. I hope you found this useful and you're excited for my big special project reveal next week. So I'm Michelle Renee Hiatt. Thank you for joining me for this week's Tutorial Tuesday, and I look forward to seeing you all soon. Please take care.